Hi everyone, my name is Della Phillips. I'm an artist as well as I'm known as the Bicycle Lady. How you doing today? I'm doing great. It's been a great day, so I hope you've been having a good day too. First of all, I want to thank you for selecting to watch this video. I really appreciate it. Next, I need to ask you a favor. Now, if you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe. It helps me out a lot with YouTube. It gives me some good positive feedback that you like what I'm videoing, as well as hit the like button. Now, let's get on with the video. I have a collection of items on my desk. It's probably what you already surmised from the title and from what I have on my desk, is I'm going to be doing part 2 of testing various watercolor papers with the watercolor markers I have, such as the two Albrecht Durer from Faber Castell watercolor markers, as well as a select group of the Winsor Newton Promarker watercolor markers. Now, I've explained why this is so important to me, because certain areas, botanical gardens and parks, are not allowing wet media anymore because of some of the issues they've had with maybe accidental spills or people not knowing better and impacts to what they're doing. So now they're requiring many areas that you use dry medium. Now, where I've gone, they have allowed me to use the watercolor marker as long as I use a water brush like this. So that's the reason why I'm testing these papers, and so I can make sure I have at least the three basic ways of applying the watercolor markers and blending it out, where you can blend it totally out and not leave any indication of a line where you applied the marker to the paper, as well as you can take the color off the tip of the marker with your brush and apply it to the paper, or put the color on a plastic palette or maybe a scrap of plastic, and then you can pick it up with your brush and apply it to the paper. So give me a minute here. I'll get everything off the table and organized so we can begin testing. I'll be right back. Hi everyone, now I'm back. I've got the table cleared off. I'm all ready to go with the testing. But first, I want to give Dick Blick a big shout out and a big thank you, because I did get some samples. There was a little bit of mix up. I don't know if it's delayed because of everything that's been going on, even after COVID. But customer service got involved and they got everything straightened out. I got these wonderful samples. So thank you very much, customer service. It's no wonder you won an award for how good you are and how well you take care of things and resolve things, because you did for me. And that's one thing I like about Dick Blick. What they sent me was this looked like trading card size, artist trading card size samples of various papers. And what I got was this Strathmore marker paper. I really don't remember requesting that, but they might be on to something. Initially wasn't going to test it, but I think I'm going to test it and see. And then we have the Dick Blick watercolor paper, which is more of a practice grade. It's not 100% cotton. It's a fine texture, and they say that you cannot moisten and stretch it. So let's see what that is. It is a fine texture, so that might be of interest if it works. We'll see. I don't know. Then I got the Dick Blick premium watercolor paper, both hot press and cold press. Some say this is actually made by Faber. I don't know. We'll see. I'm looking forward to that. And then I got the Canson Heritage Lockwell. This interested me because it's supposed to be like a arches, however you want to pronounce it, watercolor paper, or they're trying to be similar to it. I don't know. The texture is very close to the texture of arch, and the thing they're saying is they're not using gelatin sizing. It's both internally and externally sized, It's 100% cotton. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the markers with this sizing that they're using. I have both hot press and cold press, so we can compare the two. Since we did find out with the last video with Arsh that there is a difference between the two. I didn't think there would be, but there is in the same brand. And this other thing I received from Dick Blick, which is wonderful, is a collection of the Strathmore watercolor. They put this out in a booklet form, and they sent this to me with the various Strathmore watercolor papers. And it's wonderful because it has all the paper samples here, starting from the 200 series, which is the Skill Builder student grade type, and on up to their absolute best papers. And over here is a chart of all the papers, and you'll see recommend uses with the different mediums. What I'm going to be testing out of this book will be the Strathmore 400. And they do give you a good size piece where you can check some things out and feel the texture. So we're going to do the let me turn to that now, which is going to be this one here, according to this little index. They do have the item number. This is the 400. I want to turn it to that. I want to put this to the side with some of the other papers. And let's get to the Strathmore 500. I know I did the testing on this before, but I just get so tickled doing the testing. I'm not sure if I did the hot press or not. So I want to see if there's any big differences between the two with the Strathmore. This segment of the video I have increased to double normal speed. Here I've brought out the two Strathmore samples of the Imperial 500, one being the cold press, which I've tested before, and one being the hot press. Now I haven't tested that before. However, I was very interested in testing this and had high hopes since there was a difference between the Arsh hot press and the cold press, which surprised me. So I wanted to test and see if there was a difference between the Strathmore hot press and the cold press on how the markers react with directly applying the color and then blending it totally out where there would be no application lines left. You just saw where I put on the Faber Castell Albrecht Durer deep scarlet red, and I've gone back in to double check. It looked like maybe there were some lines left, but I think it was just a little bit of pooling. I went ahead and diluted it up. It did go totally in solution. Next, I put in the Winsor Newton Sepia, the infamous Sepia that's hard to totally blend on many papers. Here, it didn't totally blend. I did kind of touch the Scarlet red deep above, and there's a little bit of bleed in it. Now, the next one was the Prussian blue by the Winsor Newton. There is a slight bit of ghosting possibly, or that could be just that I didn't totally move it out, blend it totally down, and there's a little bit of pooling. We'll see when it dries. Now this one is the Winsor Newton Cadmium Red. It does appear like there is some faint line there. Next is the Rose, which is also known to be a bit difficult, not as bad as the Sepia. It does pretty well blend out on that. We'll see again when on the recap when we look at everything when it's dry. That's going to be the real litmus test here. Next is the the Hooker's Green Dark, excuse me. And it does blend out pretty much totally there. Now I'm still putting the extra line over to the side that I'm going to let sit and dry for 15 minutes before I go back in and try to blend. Now I saw on one YouTube where a lady was using, I believe, Arsh cold press. She actually put some to the side, a swatch, and dried it with a hairdryer. And it appeared on her video pretty much actually went back into solution and totally blended out after it was dry. Maybe it's because in my case I'm letting it sit and it can soak in, and it dried faster with a hair dryer. I don't know. That may be something I may look into. And the last one, of course, was the Faber Castell Cold Gray 6. Now I'm gone on to the cold press. Even though I've done this before, I wanted to do it again side by side to the hot press so
could have a good comparison. I love working on this paper. I didn't realize how much I would love it. I pretty much discounted it a long time ago, didn't really look into using the Strathmore 500. What a big error I made. This is wonderful paper. The cold press texture is not rough, it's more of a fine texture. It is a bit more texture than the hot press. Still, it wouldn't be that hard on the markers, as long as you're a little bit careful. And it's definitely less texture than the Arch or the Sanders Waterford. So this is, I see as a go-to for me when I'm using the watercolor markers, along with some others like I tested in the prior testing. We saw how good the Lana paper was, the Lana Aquarelle cold press. I hadn't had the hot press. I'm trying to get a piece of that. And we'll see how everything pans out. I'm planning on doing, in the final video of testing of the paper samples I have, to do a complete recap, or maybe I might just put that in a separate video of its own. Now you've seen I've gone down through the sepia. It looked like a little bit of pooling, but it did totally blend out. There's no lines really there. And then you have the Prussian blue, and then the cadmium red, and the rose, and now we have the Hooker's green deep. And again, I went back to touch it to make sure there wasn't any pooling, any lines, and it didn't. It totally went into solution or blending, so it blends totally out without leaving any application mark. As well as you're seeing that here with the Faber Castell Cold Gray number 6. Now to test the marker paper. Now I did not request it, but maybe Dick Blick is onto something here. So I'm going to go ahead and test it. This paper is 100% cellulose and it is made for markers. And I just applied the Faber Castell Albrecht Durer Deep Scarlet Red, and it does look like it pretty much totally blended out with the lines. I went back in and double checked, and yeah, I do believe it totally blended out here. We'll see. And then here's the sepia, the infamous sepia, the litmus test. No lines are left. It doesn't totally blend back into solution. There is a little bit of blending, maybe a moderate amount, but there is definite application lines left. As I say, ghosting of the application lines showing through. So it doesn't totally blend out with immediate blending. Now here is the Prussian blue. I'm going to blend that out immediately. I still putting the lines to the side to test after let dry for about 15 minutes. This here, I'm not sure if it totally went in or is there a slight haze there. We'll look at that closer on the recap. Now here's with the cadmium red from Winsor Newton. And let's see how it blends. Appears to be maybe a bit of a line there. Overall, I was very impressed by the marker paper. I didn't think it'd do this good. Still, from my point of view, where I want to use all 3 techniques and have that ready available, I would not use this paper. I would call it a fail. However, I guess I really should reserve judgment there until right at the end where we can look at everything dry in the recap. So here is the Hooker's Green Deep. It does look like a little bit of a line that you can see at this point. Now for the final, which is the Faber Castell Albrecht Durer Cold Gray 6. And it goes pretty much into solution, it appears. Similar to the Deep Scarlet Red, which makes me wonder, how would the other markers, if I had more markers, do on the paper? Would it totally blend out? Is that a difference possibly between the Faber Castell and the Winsor Newton? Who knows? We'll see. I don't have any plans to buy markers, to be honest with you. Hint, hint, Faber Castell, if you want to provide some more so I can do some more testing, That would be appreciated, but I think it'd be redundant. I'm happy with the Winsor Newton. I especially like the smaller bullet on the Winsor Newton compared to Faber Castell. I also like the brush, which is a little bit smaller. It comes to a finer tip as well. So now I'm testing the 400. As you see, I have already applied the Faber Castell Deep Scarlet Red, and I believe there might be a little bit of a line showing. And then I put a sepia. A fair amount of that blended out, but definitely there are application lines left, which of course I'm looking to be able to totally blend out. And I accidentally touched above, so some of the Deep Scarlet Red is bleeding down into the sepia. Next, after that, then I did the Prussian Blue as usual. It looks fairly blended out, but with a little bit of line possible. And now here is the Cad Red. It looks like it blended, but there is a slight ghosting or a slight indication of the application lines. It didn't totally blend out. Now let's check the moderately difficult, which would be the Rose, and definitely it is showing lines. In reality, the 400 I did not have high hopes for. I thought it wouldn't blend hardly at all, since it's 100% cellulose. And especially with the way that the Strathmore multimedia paper didn't blend when I tested it, when I was doing the testing with the various journals, I thought this performance would be much worse. It actually is far better than I expected. Still, I would not use this because definitely there is line shown that doesn't totally blend out when you apply the marker. As I say, ghosting of the line, it shows through from where it was applied, so I wouldn't do that. Now, it's been 15 minutes, and I am now going back in to see if I can blend out or bring the mark I put to the side and let it sit for 15 minutes to dry, if that will blend totally out. And that's what I'm doing now, applying the water on the Strathmore Hot Press 500. And as you see, some of them are moderately blending. The sepia, I wouldn't say blended that much. However, that doesn't really bother me that much, because if it doesn't totally blend out, this gives me another option and lends itself to an additional stylistic technique I can use to my advantage. Because maybe I need a hard line or a slight indication of a line. And depending on the color you use, it could vary. So that's something I'm putting in my toolbox as an additional way I can use the markers. Now here's the cold press. You see there's a little bit more that goes back into solution or blending from the mark. The sepia is pretty strong, just like before on the hot press. The Scarlet Red Deep seems a bit lighter. We'll see better when it's dry on the recap. Now, there was a little water droplet I'd gotten on the page where you saw me blending over to one side of the Prussian Blue. Now I'm blending over to the opposite side with the Cadmium Red so I can avoid touching the pool of Prussian Blue and having it bleed in. And then the Rose. They all went back into blending solution fairly well. You still have a line, some lighter than the other, but like I said, that could be a useful tool for me and lend itself to a totally different technique. Now here's the marker paper. Again, I'm doing the same thing of trying to blend everything out. The sepia obviously did not go back into blending solution at all. Some of them did. Again, we'll see the final results, but as it stands now, this is not a paper I would use to be able to use all three major techniques in applying color with the watercolor markers and creating artwork. And yes, it does look like the cold gray and the deep scarlet looks fairly similar in how they re-wet or blended after the mark sat for 15 minutes. Similar to what happened with the immediate blend as well. Now this is the Strathmore 400. There is some that goes into solution, some that hardly went into solution. Very prominent lines on all of them. So, as I said, it did perform better than I expected, but this is not really one I would use. It's going to be interesting to see here in just a second for you.
Now for a recap of the testing I've done in this video, I'm stopping it with the Strathmore testing due to how long the video is becoming. And I thought we'd be good to go over what testing we've already done. So first, with the Strathmore 500 series, I did the cold press like I've done before in another video, as well testing of a hot press, which is something new that I haven't tested before. The cold press performed beautifully. You can blend it totally out on the immediate blending where there's no application line. You do have a little bit of an application line, which can be used to an advantage with certain techniques. Now I did see someone do this on Arsh using a hairdryer, and they almost blended everything out once this was dry. I suspect it's because it didn't soak in at all or have time, whereas this was a natural drying process. I like this option, so where you can have the lines. That could be useful in a particular technique, as well as being able to immediately blend everything out. That is fabulous. Next, the hot press. It performed very similar. Slightly different because you do have a slight haze of an application line with the sepia, especially, possibly a little bit with the Hooker's Green Dark. That may have been an error on my part, but again, when you went back after it sat and dried for 15 minutes, you do see a little bit of a line, pretty comparable to what you see with the hot press. I mean the cold press up there with the Strathmore cold press. So there is a slight difference with the sepia and so forth. I'm going to say it's still a pass because it's very manageable. However, the best performer so far in the Strathmore testing is the 500 cold press. And this is a fine cold press on the 500 series. A rougher cold press would be the Gemini series of the Strathmore, which we saw with the travel journal. Now for the rest of the Strathmore testing, it was great that Blick gave me this book, compendiums of samples that Strathmore gives to Blick, and they did give me one of them, and thank you, Blick. So I was able to go ahead and test some an additional paper. But before we get to the 400 paper that I tested out of the book, let's look at the sample that they gave me of the Strathmore marker paper. Now this is not cotton, this is cellulose, it is acid free, and it actually performed better than I expected. You still see ghosting in the line, but not as prominent as I suspected it probably would be. Due to the performance when I looked at the mixed media one, it was very prominent. Whereas this, there is a fair amount of blending, and in some cases almost totally out. You can just barely see a haze of an application line. So this is still a fail, but it was a pleasant surprise. Now, for the 400, I expect a total fail. This definitely performed better than what I expected. It did a little bit better than the marker paper. You still have the direct application lines that you can see on a couple of these, or more than a couple of these. Sepia here, a little bit with the Hooker Green Dark, and then there's some others that look like they're almost totally blended out. So even though this is 100% cellulose of 400, it did surprise me. It is still a fail as far as I'm concerned. Still manageable if that's what you have, as long as you know this will happen and you want to use the 3 techniques. Just be aware that I'm considering that a fail. Okay, that's it for this video. And now my next video will be the rest of the Blick samples will be tested, as well as a couple paper samples of my own that I had, including Paul Rubens, I believe, which a lot of people get off of Amazon since it is cost effective and it's 100% cotton. So look for that. And then there will be a subsequent video, because I did just get some samples in from Winsor Newton, which I like to say thank you very much. They were generous with the hot press and cold press samples that they gave me, multiple pages, and we'll be testing those with the Winsor Newton watercolor pigment markers, as well as the Faber Castell pigment watercolor markers. Until next time, you have a good day.